As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Poland rushes troops to border with Belarus. So Poland on Tuesday said that it was rushing more troops to its border with Belarus after accusing Belarus of violating Polish airspace with military helicopters, a claim that Belarusian officials denied. So according to Reuters, Poland's defense ministry said that it was sending additional forces and resources, including combat helicopters, to the border. Belarus has accused Poland of making up the allegation about helicopters violating its airspace to justify a further military buildup on the border. The Belarusian Defense Ministry said, quote, "This statement was not backed up by data from Poland. The Belarusian Defense Ministry views it in the manner of an old wives' tale and notes there were no border violations by Mi-8 and Mi-24 helicopters," end quote. So Poland has already been beefing up its border with Belarus due to the presence of the Russian mercenary force Wagner Group in Belarus. Wagner members recently held drills near the border, and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko claimed that the Russian mercenaries wanted to enter Poland. Amid these tensions that have been brewing between Poland and Belarus, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned Poland that he would treat an attack on Belarus as an attack on Russia. He also accused Poland of having designs on Ukrainian territory and warned that a Polish-Lithuanian force might enter western Ukraine under the guise of kind of helping, the Ukrainians, but really with the goal of wanting to occupy the territory. That's what Putin's saying. So definitely an area to keep an eye on. Poland has been one of the most hawkish, gung-ho, NATO countries when it comes to supporting this proxy war and their rhetoric and support for Ukraine. And, this is something that could always spiral out of control, especially if helicopters are crossing the border. Who knows what the story is with that. So Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Tuesday insisted that his government was taking a firm stand against the U.S. persecution of WikiLeaks founder and Australian citizen Julian Assange. So during a recent visit to Australia, Secretary of State Antony Blinken rejected concerns raised by his Australian counterpart about Assange, who faces up to 175 years in prison for exposing U.S. war crimes if extradited to the U.S. Albanese told reporters on Tuesday that the U.S. case against Julian Assange has gone on for too long. He said enough is enough. He said Blinken's public comments about Assange echo what U.S. officials have said privately about the WikiLeaks founder. He said, quote, "We remain very firm in our view and our representations to the American government, and we will continue to do so," end quote. So this is good to see him saying that. But on the other hand, while he's insisting that his government is firm on the issue, the U.S. pursuit of Assange has not impacted U.S.-Australian military ties. So I've been covering the U.S. and Australia during that visit when Blinken was in Australia saying this. They also announced all these new, steps to increase the U.S. military footprint in the country. This article is from Consortium News. 3 Australian members of parliament have dismissed U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's strong statement in support of prosecuting imprisoned WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange as nonsense. Independent MP Andrew Wilkie told The Guardian's Australian edition that Assange was, quote, "not the villain, and if the U.S. wasn't obsessed with revenge, it would drop the extradition charge as soon as possible." Antony Blinken's allegation that Julian Assange risked very serious harm to U.S. national security is patent nonsense. Mr. Blinken would be well aware of the inquiries in both the U.S. and Australia, which found that the relevant WikiLeaks disclosures did not result in harm to anyone. The only deadly behavior was by U.S. forces exposed by WikiLeaks, like the Apache crew who gunned down Iraqi civilians and Reuters journalists, end quote. And he's referring to the infamous collateral murder video. So it's good to see more opposition to the U.S. persecution of Julian Assange. This article is from Connor Freeman over at the Libertarian Institute. The Biden administration released a report endorsing the renewal of a controversial law which enables U.S. intelligence agencies to spy on foreign nationals and American citizens on Monday. This comes amid a heated debate in Congress regarding how such surveillance powers are weaponized against the American people, as well as a slew of scandals involving these capabilities being wielded by the FBI against protesters and lawmakers. So published by the President's Intelligence Advisory Board and Intelligence Oversight Board, the 42-page report states that a failure of Congress to renew Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act before it expires at the end of the year would constitute one of the worst intelligence failures of our lifetime. So Section 702 authorizes a tool used by U.S. spy agencies to conduct warrantless surveillance on foreign targets and any Americans with whom they may be interacting. This practice has long been criticized by domestic civil liberties groups because in the process, Also collected are U.S. citizens' electronic communications, including phone calls, text messages, and emails. I speak with a lot of people outside of the country, so, under this law, that means that they could, use this to spy on me. So it's a very serious thing here, and it's not a surprise that the White House wants to renew it. If it's not reauthorized in December, the law will expire, which would be very good. And there has been more opposition to this from Republicans lately because the FBI has kind of been weaponized against some of them. So hopefully, that with some of the Democrats that are still opposed to it, you have a lot of Democrats, I'm sure, that favor extending this, but there are still some that are against it. So hopefully it's enough to stop this, because this is a serious abuse of the government's power. This article is from Kyle Anzalone, again, at the Libertarian Institute. And this is, as far as I know, this is the first, formal meeting between U.S. and Taliban officials since the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan back in August 2021. They've, I believe, held some kind of, some sort of talks, but this is the first official meeting. So U.S. officials met with Taliban diplomats in Qatar for 2 days of talks. The discussions come as Washington's economic war in Kabul has caused severe suffering for the Afghan people 2 years after the end of the U.S. military occupation. So yeah, the U.S. sanctions are all still in effect, and they seized the central bank funds. A State Department press release said that Special Representative for Afghanistan, Thomas West, and the Special Envoy for Afghan Women, Rina Amiri, and the Chief of the Mission to Afghanistan, Karen Decker, met with senior Taliban officials on Sunday and Monday. The press release said that U.S. officials chastised the Taliban over their human rights abuses, which is not a surprise. Since returning to power in 2021, the Taliban have imposed bans preventing women from publicly participating in society. And Kyle mentions that Washington's human rights record in Afghanistan is also abysmal. America's 2-decade occupation of Afghanistan was marked by mass killings of civilians, torture, and support for warlords who habitually sexually abused young boys. Remember how they left August 29th, 2021. Biden ordered a drone strike that slaughtered 10 civilians and 7 children, one of the last U.S. military action in Afghanistan. During the talks, American and Taliban officials also discussed the Afghan economy. The Taliban's calling for the U.S. to lift sanctions and unfreeze Afghan central bank funds. I don't know if these talks made any progress in that direction or not. It doesn't seem like it. But interesting that they held this meeting.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
What a disgusting country this has turned into. What a disgusting fucking clowns running the show. Stealing our money, giving it to their buddies. Oh, you like that merger and acquisition activity, huh? How about those hedge funds? Oh, no, I like private equity groups. Ooh, venture capitalists are for me. All these things didn't exist when I was a young man. I say this over and over again. There were hardware stores, grocery stores, drugstores. One story after another. Now there are chain stores. There are stationary chains. Oh, go to Staples. Oh, no more hardware stores. Go to Lowe's. No, I go to Home Depot. I got one or two. How about grocery stores? Kroger's for me. Fuck you, mom and pop. How about drugstores? Oh, CVS. I love them. Oh, how about Walgreens? Well, they're good too. You got it. Fucking little scumbag pricks. And I can't say the other word. Has sold this country out and give it to the bigs. Little stupid fucking morons. Little fucking stupid morons. And again, I was on the other side. I was the assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate. I saw the freak show firsthand. Scumbags. Now let's get to your Trends Journal, because this is an important issue. As a matter of fact, there's a great article in this week's Trends Journal by Gregory Mannarino. Are you ready? Central banks will vastly inflate from here. Yep, every president and every world leader knows it, he said. Currently, every single developed nation on earth is expected to vastly increase spending moving forward. And with that, global debt will continue to spiral ever higher with no end. That's right. Central banksters. Once upon a time, as the story goes, Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, became violent to drive the banksters out of the temple. Well, this is a 2012 issue. The numbers are coming out and they're not good. And all they're doing is selling more fucking low-life scumbag prostitute. Bullshit. Because you know why? They swallow. Bullshit. You know why? Because they're a bunch of bullshit. Yep. That's all they are. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. That is bullshit. That's who they are. This is serious what's going on. The numbers suck. The numbers suck. Oh, you ready? Germany's economy is stagnant. Stagnant. Yeah, 2 fucking quarters of negative GDP. Oh, it hasn't moved right now, so it's okay. Hey, how about Italy? Oh, it's down. Hey, Sweden, it's down. How about Austria? Well, it's down. But overall, there was economic growth. Hey, fuckface. Germany's the 4th largest economy in the world. It's in recession. It hasn't moved. China? Hey, did you look at their purchasing managers' numbers coming in, PMI numbers? Nah, we don't look at that stuff. This is serious what's going on. And we're giving it to you. Economic update, market overview. You ready? Corporate debt is at risk. No kidding. Only said this for how long? Most junk bonds have been downgraded. They call investors steer clear of consumer stocks. We say gamblers steer clear because consumers aren't buying. This is vacation time. They're spending money on services. This thing is serious what's going on. Oh, and JP Morgan, all of a sudden it became a gold bug. Yep. And is the housing recession over? Office building bust? 2 more U.S. banks bite the dust. Just the beginning. And then, of course, trends on the global economic front. When the economy falls, jobs go with it. This is our 49th week of putting all the job losses that are going on. And what else do we have? Oh, a load of stuff. What's going on in Canada? What's going on in Europe? What's going on in China? By the way, China's manufacturing activity shrunk for the 4th consecutive month. And we have a spotlight on the office building bust. And Ukraine war trend update. What's going on over there? Whole load of stuff. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with these interest rate hikes. Things are going to go down. We're in a summer state of mind right now. The GDP numbers are going up because people are traveling more, spending more in restaurants, in hotels. They're not buying more products to bring up the GDP. And we're certainly not manufacturing them because the manufacturing numbers keep going down, as we detail in the Trends Journal, not only here, but in Europe as well and in China. Manufacturing is a key element. They don't talk about it. It's not what people buy. It's what they're making. And then as inflation, they're selling the bullshit that inflation numbers are coming down. They're not going down. People are buying less and they're paying more. Insurance on houses, on cars, healthcare, boom, skyrocketing. The numbers that have gone up on, the average price of a car, $50,000 for a piece of electronic shit. So yeah, the prices are coming down, but they're still very high. So our forecast is that you're going to start seeing the market start to tremble a little bit. But it's August. It's people are over in Europe. They're out of it. It's gone. It's vacation time. The reality is going to start hitting in mid-September to August.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
As early as February of 2020, I started to share articles and ask questions about the effectiveness and viability of what I saw coming down the pike. They were planting the seeds as early as February that we were going to go into lockdown. And I ended up just getting into fights with family and friends. I didn't fight. I didn't kind of raise my proverbial voice, but others attacked me pretty viciously. And I moved off of Facebook. I still have an account, but I moved off of it pretty quickly because I didn't want to fight with family and friends. And I also found that on Twitter, as you know, you can meet people that you don't know. You can engage in conversations with people you don't know. I could DM doctors about specific data and they would answer my questions. So I was very curious and trying to educate myself. So I moved over to Twitter fairly quickly. And it's interesting, when I went back and I was writing the book, I looked back at some of the Facebook conversations I had remembered, and many of the people who had attacked me had deleted those posts.
Oh, is that so? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to print some of them in the book or use some of the arguments that folks made. And I remembered one conversation in particular. It was driving me crazy because I couldn't find it, but I found my part of the conversation. But on Facebook, I don't think you can see that it's deleted. You know, on Twitter, you can see when something's deleted. And I was so confused. And then I realized that person had gone in and deleted everything. Because in hindsight, it was ridiculous. It made no sense. I was correct. Schools were harmful. I wasn't a teacher murderer. And so I can only imagine they felt some shame in how they had spoken to me in that interaction.
You eventually went on with Laura Ingraham on Fox News, and you report on this in the book.
That was a kiss of death. Yeah.
Yeah, that was because for some reason we've moved into this phase of American history in which if you go on somebody's show, you are therefore on that person's team and endorse everything that person thinks.
That's right. If you talk to somebody.
And by the way, I deal with that as a podcast host because if I have person X on the show, that means I endorse everything person X thinks.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
What kind of a boring show would that be?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, you should have friends you don't agree with on everything. My husband and I don't agree on everything. I mean, it's just ludicrous. But yeah, what happened was it was a year in because I had been kind of dissenting and expressing my views on social media, but also I led rallies to get the schools open. I wrote op-eds. I attended school board meetings. I wasn't just banging away at the keyboard. I was really trying to move this thing forward and get the schools open unsuccessfully. No media outlets would cover open schools moms, as we called ourselves. No one would give us a platform or a voice in the conversation. It was all just more of the same. It was the teachers' unions and Randy Weingarten and the politicians in the left-leaning states saying, if you open the schools, you'll kill all the teachers, which we know is false. We knew it then and we certainly know it now. And so in March of 2021, I had moved my family to Denver, Colorado, so that my young children could attend school. I had a kindergartner at the time, and his only experience thus far had been in Zoom school. And that was not the experience of school I wanted him to have. When I shared that on Twitter, the Ingram angle reached out to me to appear on the show. And I consulted with my fellow open schools moms, and I said, I know this is going to be controversial, but what do you think? Should I do it? And we had been agitating to try to get ourselves in the mainstream media to no avail. And they all said, you should do it. Stick to your talking points. Don't say anything you don't mean. I'm a trained media professional, as the brand president, I knew I could do it. So I agreed to be on the show. And of course, that unleashed everything you just alluded to inside the company and outside the company. And suddenly that was just reinforcement that I was a white supremacist in disguise. I didn't care if Black children died. That's what was said, because if you wanted the schools to open, public schools, which are disproportionately populated by low-income and Black and brown students, that I clearly didn't care if those children died. And it really, I lasted at the company for almost a full other year, but that just started this kind of employee outrage inside the company because I had basically, in their minds, revealed my true colors as a very right-leaning racist. I mean, that's what they assumed. And when I say the noise got loud inside the company, it was still a small, very punitive group of employees, but they created a lot of disruption, and they emailed HR and they emailed my boss, the CEO, and they got sick of it. The leaders in the company got sick of it, and they were very afraid of what that might do to the reputation of the company. And there was that same sort of pushback on social media. And COVID really became this woke policy of the progressive left. We need to stay shut down forever. We're doing it to protect the vulnerable, when in fact it harmed the vulnerable the most. It became, I don't know why, I'm not sure I'll ever understand it. It could be because there was a presidential election coming and they wanted to demonize Trump and his policies, although he helped support the lockdown. So that's neither here nor there. But it just became highly politicized, I would argue, because the left politicized it. And so it's all part and parcel with all of these quote unquote progressive or left-leaning policies and programs that companies are furthering in the world today. It became kind of all one and the same. And clearly COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020 sort of merged, right? For some people, that was their awakening. They were going, wait a minute, why is public health saying thousands can gather for these rallies, but not other reasons? It doesn't make any sense.
Do you guys know that there was someone who died on the Obama estate recently? Okay, yes. So a person died. This is what's, yes. So first, they reported that it was just some random person that had nothing to do with the Obamas or anything like that. Then it came out that it was Obama's private chef, but who had like he
been vaccinated.
That was great. Yeah, this guy's good. There's a reason why I bring him with me everywhere I go. Well, then it came out that he had been, I don't know if he was fired or quit, but he was his former private chef or something like that. And then at first they were like, oh, Obama, Barack and Michelle were out of town. They weren't there. Then it came out that they were there. So it's all these different conflicting stories. But evidently there's a picture of Barack Obama. This might be completely altered. I'm getting this from Rob. I don't know if he's verified this at all. But evidently Barack Obama has been spotted with a Kentucky Fried Chicken hand. Is this real, Rob?
And so this was just a random Twitter spotting, and I was like, that can't be real. But then I found the exact picture from, it's always good.
Another random Twitter spotting?
No. It was from the UK, what's that? Daily Mail, thank you. It was from the Daily Mail.
So you know it's real.
I mean, it's not the Wall Street Journal, but it's also not a random Twitter page, so.
Okay, so this is in the Daily Mail. All right, that's something.
Yeah.
And so what they're saying, so he's got some He's got some tape on some fingers. It doesn't look great.
No. Also, can I tell you, this is why I don't believe this picture, is because Barack Obama wasn't beating someone up. If he was going to kill someone, he would drone them. That's what he does. You know what I mean? Everyone's got their move. He would call in a, like, that's
that is his signature.
That's his Mortal Kombat fatality.
Right.
That's the way that would happen.
Well, isn't it? I mean, look, dude, that's a great joke, but isn't it? You're really touching on something that I think is fucking. So I talked about this on when I was on Patrick Bet-David's show the other day, because he had just gotten in a thing. Yeah, he's great. I love that guy. So he had just gotten. Yeah, he's a monster. But so he had gotten in a thing with Anthony Weiner earlier that day, and then I went on the show later that day, and he had brought up the all of the people who are adjacent to the Clintons who have ended up murdered.
Oh, what a great clip that was.
And Anthony Weiner is just morally outraged about this. You know,
you're better than this.
He was like, how dare you, says the guy who sends dick pics to 15-year-olds. Anyway, which is really something to say. Like, once you're outed for sending dick pics to 15-year-olds, you really can't be morally outraged about anyone else, you know? But he was talking about this, and I mentioned this when I was on the show because the topic came up, and I was like, well, why is it that we're supposed to think it's so crazy that these guys would have someone killed when we know that they've had hundreds of thousands of people killed? Like, it's just called foreign policy, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I understand some of you can separate the idea that the government launching a war is completely different than you just killing someone or you just hiring someone to have someone killed. But if it was any other organization other than the government, like if you just had a job where part of the job was hiring someone to kill people, and then you were accused in your private life of hiring someone to kill people, and I went, they would never do that. Wouldn't you kind of be like, well, yeah, no, they totally would. Because, like, they do that at work every day. You know what I mean? And so, like, there's just something interesting about that where, like, people be like, oh, the Clintons had these people killed. And people go, there's no way. And you're like, well, I know they've had people killed. We all know they've had people killed. Obama is literally, he was quoted as saying, and I quote, I'm very good at murdering people. That's, you can go Google Obama, I'm very good at murdering people. And there's an intern who will tell you this is what he said to him. And he was talking about the drone bomb campaigns. Like, he was like, yo, if you're a terrorist, I'll fucking murder you, you know? And also, if you're within 100 miles of a terrorist, I'll probably murder you too. Right. He didn't say that verbatim, but that's really what the track record demonstrates.
Or just at a wedding with some kids.
It's like, or maybe we just misread some cell phone data, you know, and like we kill it. But anyway, it's just like,
don't borrow your friend's phone in Pakistan.
Like, just why is it so crazy to assume that the guy who killed people professionally would maybe have someone killed privately? It's like if you heard a story about me being at home with my wife and they were like, did you hear what happened when Dave was with his wife? He was cracking jokes. And you went, he would never. He would never do that.
Oh, all right here. Last question. Make it good or I'll fucking murder you.
Dave, what does Ron Paul mean to you?
That, to me, he's the fucking, you know, the OG of all this shit. I mean, Ron Paul, like, you know, he, like, I don't know. It's a weird thing to say. It almost sounds like so strange for me to say it, but, like, Ron Paul is like a father figure to me in a lot of ways, you know? And I never had like I didn't have like a father in my life. And I've only met Ron Paul like 6 times or something like that. But something like that. I don't know. I said something like that. That was a weird response. That's it, motherfucker? Like, all right, fine. But to me, what he is like, I can't say enough nice things about the guy. I think Ron Paul is the greatest living American hero, like the absolute greatest. Like, and I don't think that's an overstatement. Like this motherfucker is first off, as someone who has 2 kids, he's a baby doctor. He was an OBGYN who delivered like 3,000 babies. So just that alone, I think, would make you like a great man. And then on top of that, he's a country baby doctor who then just decided, because he was like obsessively reading about Austrian economics and war and history. Like what doctor is doing that? And then goes, I understand this stuff so much that I have to run for Congress simply to make a point, to like let people know this is the path our country's going on. And he did this in the 70s because we had gotten off the gold standard right after we fought the war in Vietnam. And he was like, I have to let people know that there's like a path that we're going down here as a country that's going to lead toward like an authoritarian society. So he gives up his medical practice to go run for Congress and then wins and then goes, I have to stay in Congress to keep fighting all of these authoritarian measures. And then after that, after doing that for another 30 years, like, first off, he ran for president in 88, then goes back to Congress in the 90s, then goes, like, in 2008, 30 years later, I got to run for president to let everybody know. And then so many people love what he has to say that 4 years later, at this point, he's in his late 70s. He's like, I'm going to run for president again to keep spreading this message because you know what? There's so much important shit in this tradition of John Locke and, whatever, Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises and all of these guys, and that I'm going to keep introducing people to these ideas because they're so important for people to know them. And then he, since then, and then he's like, after he's done, now he's almost 90, and he's still like, I'm going to do a show every day, just trying to inform people about what's really going on here. And the whole time he's done that, he's been married to the same woman his whole life. I think they've been married for 60 years or something like that. He's got like 5 kids and like 25 grandkids or something like that. Like, I don't know, dude. He's fucking Thomas Jefferson of our generation. He's just like the greatest living American hero, and better than Thomas Jefferson. And I'll tell you this, and this is the thing. I literally was saying this to Rob earlier today, by the way. For how much I've ever talked about Ron Paul, that even today we were saying this, is that as much as I hate, progressives and like the progressive politicians piss me the fuck off, it's the thing that still keeps me a member of the Libertarian Party that I'll just never forgive Republicans for. And maybe this is because this was just my time, is that, say whatever, there was something today, and this is where it came from, was that Rob was telling me about today, I guess Rand Paul and Mitt Romney had some back and forth in the Senate where Mitt Romney was like arguing for why the government should be allowed to like talk to social media companies to tell them who they think's spreading misinformation. And Rand Paul was like, no, they shouldn't, because that's fucking not the role of government. And I'm just like, no matter what, even as much as the progressives piss me off, and sometimes I feel like I have more in common with Republican voters than Democratic voters, I'm just like, you motherfuckers picked Mitt Romney over Ron Paul. And I'll never forgive you for that. You had Thomas Jefferson running for president, and you picked Mitt fucking Romney over him. It's almost like you deserve everything you're getting, I know that was 10 years ago, but like, you deserve it. You deserve your kids to be transed for what you did to Ron Paul, that you'd pick Mitt Romney over him, So, greatest living American, Ron Paul. That's a great way to end the fucking show. Thank you guys so much. I love you so much for coming out.
Now, you have a great piece in the recent American Conservative called Make Peace, You Fools, with an exclamation point. And it goes down the list of what's happening in the very shifting landscape when it comes to the U.S.-NATO war against Russia through Ukraine. And one of the points you make toward the end is the reason why you say make peace, you fools, which is your recognition that the neocons have no reverse gear. They only know how to escalate, and things aren't going according to plan. Now, you bring up the topic of a Polish-led division, including the Balts and some mercenaries, going into some areas of Western Ukraine. Do you think that might be the next chapter in escalation? And if so, how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's plausible. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that this is another unnecessary war. This could have been avoided very early if we had simply listened to the Russians and treated their security interests seriously. There was no need to advance beyond the eastern border of Poland. Some people would argue there was no reason to advance NATO beyond the borders of Germany. But at this point, having gone into Ukraine and then worked tirelessly to turn it into a platform for attack against Russia, we have essentially consigned Ukraine to destruction. And that's where we are now. Ukraine is actually in ruins. And this brings us to a point in this crisis or conflict that I think is more dangerous than ever.
The propaganda machine is obviously very important, and leading up to this, it was, the anti-Russia propaganda, and that's continuing. It's there. Russia did it. NATO's totally innocent. They're saving humanity and democracy and protecting our national defense and that sort of thing. But, already in the last month or so, it seems like there's been a shift. Not that everything you said is absolutely true and it's going to continue until it really collapses, but I think the propagandists have shifted. At least the noise I hear is, it's China, it's China, it's China. And this to me means, maybe they have to shift. They blame Russia for everything. Who knows? They're not going to blame NATO. And maybe they can get away with saying, well, it was all Ukraine's fault for getting us involved in that over there. But they're right now, this China bashing, how do you see that in context of what's going on in Ukraine? It just seems like they're preparing, well, we have to have another enemy. And when you talk to the politicians and listen to them, the right and the left, the Republicans are probably worse than the Democrats, but they're all terrible. But they're pretty much together. We got to go for China because they are the real enemy. They've sort of diminished, the attack on Russia for the moment.
Well, I think there's much truth in that. Let's face it, they failed miserably to, quote unquote, weaken Russia. If anything, Russia is stronger now, more capable militarily than it has been since the 1980s. So the whole operation in Ukraine from a purely American standpoint is a total failure. And no doubt there is a desire to distract attention from this inevitable failure that's going to creep into the news and eventually find its way into American consciousness. So there are two things going on. I think, as we pointed out, you have this lingering potential for a terrible, terrible regional war in Ukraine that persists. And at the same time, it's obvious that people are looking privately for a way to sort of disengage by saying, well, look, we did everything we could. We gave these Ukrainians everything. They just couldn't make it happen. So it's their problem now. Meanwhile, let's look at China, the new boogeyman.
And empires, and because of bad policy, and very often debt. They can't afford it anymore. And we're facing that. I think our preparedness for a true defensive war is diminished. At the same time, the debt is skyrocketing. So every year, the military budget comes up. They just passed it in the House and the Senate. They haven't had it signed yet. But my effort to try to diminish that was a proposal I want you to comment on. That is that maybe we could agree on cutting the military because we don't need it if we had a slightly different foreign policy. Now, in a practical sense, I wondered if you think that's a possibility, or do you think the politicians would ever do that to actually cut back? But, the Republicans and the Democrats are really gung-ho. That is like a sacred bill, in the Congress, although we see signs that the number in opposition is growing right now, and hopefully that will put them in a position where they think, well, maybe we will have to cut. But the budget eventually, I think, will be a limiting factor for the war.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, history suggests that politicians would rather go under than admit that anything is wrong or should be adjusted. I mean, the problem with defense spending is it's just too profitable for too many people inside the Beltway. And I don't know how you change that. And of course, whenever you look at the defense budget, how much of it is simply redistributed income that goes to donors, income that goes to selected constituents in specific districts and states. I mean, you know that from your vast experience coming from Texas. But I think there's another factor here. Every time I bring up the debt, I'm told, well, Doug, you just don't understand modern economics. Debt doesn't matter. Well, I think we're about to get an education, one that you tried to impart to people back many, many years ago. It's going to happen. But look at the British Empire. When did the British ultimately leave India, the great crown jewel in the crown of the British Empire? It left when the debt to GDP ratio was 240%. That was after World War II in 1947, when the British had effectively bankrupted themselves during the war. That's when I think we will finally give up the ghost and walk away. The bad news is that when that happens, the military establishment is almost dissolved or liquidated in a fire sale. Now, some people will say, well, that's just fine. My argument has always been that's not a good thing, because you do need a military establishment, but you don't need what you have. And you need to do this prudently and intelligently. But I fear that won't happen. I mean, just trying to explain to people that you don't want large numbers of U.S. forces at sea or on land overseas in forward bases anymore, because the world has changed. Precision-guided munitions that can be launched over thousands of miles make that sort of thing self-defeating. It means that if you do have forces anywhere and somebody shoots at you at the people where you happen to have troops stationed, you're going to be dragged into something that you may want nothing to do with. So this whole business of forward basing needs to go away. Nobody wants to admit that you can't rapidly reinforce across the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. There are these things now called submarines. They are the king of warfare at sea. In the Navy, people talk about two kinds of ships in the Navy. One class, submarines, the other class, targets. I mean, things have changed in terms of technology. We don't want to come to terms with that, because if you start recognizing what you cannot do in the future that you did in the past, well, then people say exactly what you did, Dr. Paul. Well, perhaps we don't need X, Y, and Z anymore. And they're right. We don't. In September, I want to talk about a few things, one of which is the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I identify those as being atheism, nihilism, Marxism, and globalism. And those four horses are running all over the West and trampling our civilization beneath their feet. And that's what has to end. And the only people that can do that are us. I mean, if there's one thing I keep trying to tell people over and over and over, well, do you think so-and-so is going to be elected and he will save us? He will lead us out of this. And I keep looking at them and saying, stop looking for someone to save you. Organize. Become active. You've got to save yourselves.